Hello everyone, Sandrone will be the one new 5-star character of patch Luna 8, making her the final character being released in nod-krai. As the character right before snezhnaya, her kit introduces a new mechanic that will likely be core to the many upcoming new units for the next region, Stellar Reactions. And at least after the version 2 beta changes, Sandrone looks incredibly strong, perhaps way too strong when you consider the future meta of the game. So to see what Sandrone is looking to introduce and how strong she's currently looking, let's go over her initial beta kit. But of course, remember that this is very early information from beta, so very subject to change before official release. Sandrone is a 5-star Cryo Claymore character who ascends with crit rate. She is the first DPS revolving around the new Stellar Reactions. Specifically, she plays around Stellar Conduct, the stellar version of Super Conduct, Cryo plus Electro. Just like how the 3 lunar reactions work, Sandrone has a passive that enables your team to trigger Stellar Conduct instead of Super Conduct. She also buffs the base damage of the reaction by 14% with at least 2000 attack, same as the moon sign passives for the lunar reactions. Sandrone will also enter the Radiant Stellar Conduct state when she's in something called a Pole Star Field, which are important mechanics that directly involve the Stellar Conduct reaction. So let's first go over what Stellar Conduct does. Normally, triggering normal Super Conduct gave you AoE cryo damage and 40% physical res shred to enemies hit by this AoE for 12 seconds. But Stellar Conduct is very different. Triggering Stellar Conduct does not deal any reaction damage, but instead creates a large field called a Pole Star Field for 6 seconds, and triggering Stellar Conduct again will refresh this duration. While you're in this Pole Star Field, characters will enter the Radiant Stellar Conduct state, which empowers their kits to deal more damage and enable passive buffs. Additionally, while the field exists, it provides the team damage buffs. Enemies in the field will have their physical res shred reduced by 40%, maintaining the effect of normal Super Conduct, and the field gives the team a Cryo, Electro, and Stellar Conduct damage buff, scaling with how often you hit enemies with Cryo and Electro attacks within a 3-second period. While the field is active, it will track the total amount of Cryo and Electro hits done to enemies by your entire party. Each hit gives you 1 stack, and the amount of stacks will determine the damage buff you get for 3 seconds up to a max of 10. This incentivizes a team with Cryo and Electro characters that have all field presence, so that you can consistently maintain a high number of stacks, ideally 10, while your main DPS is on field. The buff is just regular damage percent for Cryo and Electro damage, but for Stellar Conduct damage, it instead gives a unique multiplier that goes into the Stellar base multiplier section of its damage formula. Since the Stellar Conduct reaction itself deals no damage, all Stellar Conduct damage is direct, meaning it comes from character abilities. Now if we compare this formula to the direct lunar crystallized damage formula, you'll notice that the formula structures are the exact same. This means that Stellar reaction damage works the exact same way as lunar reaction damage, so it's affected by the abilities multiplier, the base reaction damage buff from character passives, elemental mastery, stellar reaction damage bonus but not elemental damage bonus, enemy elemental res but not their defense, elevation, and lastly the character's crit stats. Now that we know how Stellar Conduct works, let's go over Sandrone's actual kit. Her main damage comes from her charge attack, playing a little similarly to Nivilet. When you hold down her charge attack, she will summon her mecha to fire cryo attacks aiming in front of her. While Sandrone has Radiant Stellar Conduct active, her charge attacks will continually fire 3 regular cryo hits, then 1 Stellar Conduct beam hit. Now while Sandrone is using her charge attack, she will continuously accumulate points called decoding power. She starts at 0 decoding power at the start of her charge attack, and once she reaches 100 decoding power after firing enough attacks, her mecha will enter power overdrive mode, dealing less damage. At C0, 1 whole charge attack from Sandrone can do 3 normal cryo hits and 1 Stellar Conduct hit 3 times before entering power overdrive mode. In order to exit it, you need to decrease decoding power from 100 to under 50, but ideally you decrease it all the way back to 0. Swapping Sandrone off field can achieve this, but another way she can do this is by using her elemental skill. Using it makes her hover around and fire 2 attacks, 1 regular cryo damage and 1 Stellar Conduct damage when Radiant Stellar Conduct is active. This skill instantly reduces decoding power by 40 points, plus an additional 10 points for every 10th of a second she hovers with the skill. So for her gameplay, Sandrone can use her charge attack until she enters power overdrive, then use her skill to completely reset her decoding power so she can use her full charge attack again. And since the skill has a 4-second cooldown, you can technically do this however much you want, making her a pretty flexible on-fielder. Sandrone's burst simply does 3 hits of AoE cryo damage, then a final hit of Stellar Conduct damage as long as Radiant Stellar Conduct is active. Lastly, her remaining passives simply increase her damage. Her A1 passive has 2 parts. The first part increases the Stellar Conduct damage from her skill when her skill reduces greater than 50 decoding power points, and the second part gives Sandrone stacks of refined tactics for every 10 decoding power that she reduces up to a max of 10 stacks, and these stacks are all consumed when using her burst, causing it to deal more damage. And with how her current on-field rotation works out, she pretty much always gets the max damage from her burst when she uses it. And then for her A4 passive, it it gives Sandrone additional EM based on her attack when Radiant Stellar Conduct is active, and both attack and EM increase Sandrone's stellar conduct damage. That's everything on Sandrone's current base kit. For Constellations, C1 makes Sandrone generate decoding power at a 50% lower rate when she uses her charge attack. Effectively, this makes her charge attack deal double the amount of hits compared to C0, while also increasing the time to perform her entire charge attack. C1 also allows the party to deal 30% increased stellar conduct damage. With Radiant Stellar Conduct, C2 increases the damage of Sandrone's stellar conduct beam hits, with subsequent beams dealing more damage. C3 grants 3 normal attack talent levels. With C4, when Sandrone does stellar conduct damage with her abilities, she will fire an additional attack that deals stellar conduct damage. C5 grants 3 burst talent levels, and lastly, with C6, Sandrone will fire a continuous laser beam starting from the 3rd stellar conduct beam hit from her charge attack, enabling 4 additional instances of stellar conduct damage on top of her normal stellar conduct beam hits. It also gives Sandrone 20% elevation to her stellar conduct damage. Overall, Sandrone's constellations are alright at the moment, but her early constellations like C1 and C2 don't give as much of a damage increase compared to other modern limited 5-star DPSs. This could be an intentional design choice for the upcoming new 5-star characters of Snezhnaya, but if not, Sandrone's constellations do warrant a slight buff. In terms of her potential best build options, her signature will be a restant slot, crit damage substat, additional attack percent, and up to 60% stellar conduct damage for Sandrone. For 5-star weapon alternatives, anything that gives stats like crit and attack percent are good to use, so there are plenty of usable options. Just keep in mind that Sandrone gets a good amount of crit rate from her Ascension passive, artifact set, and cryo resonance, so crit rate weapons may make you overcap. For 4-star weapons, the Fontaine craftable Tidal Shadow is great if you have a healer on the team since it gives a ton of extra attack. The event weapon Mailed Flower is also good because it gives attack and EM after Sandrone triggers an elemental reaction, which she'll generally do after her first skill usage. Lastly, the Melizun Claymore is also good as the passive gives attack and the substat gives energy recharge. And as of version 2 of the beta, Sandrone's burst does pretty good damage, so the ER is useful. For artifacts, Sandrone is a stellar conduct DPS, so she wants 4-piece disenchantment, which is updated to give 40% stellar conduct damage, along with a 16% crit rate. For main stats, she wants attack hourglass, attack goblet because cryo damage goblet does not affect stellar conduct damage, and then crit circlet, likely crit damage. And then she likes crit, attack, EM, and ER substats, assuming you want to burst every rotation. Finally, Sandrone's potential best teams. Due to how the stellar conduct reaction works, with its field giving increased damage buffs depending on the number of cryo and electro hits every 3 seconds, you want at least 1 cryo and 1 electro off-fielder that provides damage and or supports the team. And that should be enough to max the damage buff from stellar conduct while Sandrone is on field. Then for the last slot, it's quite flexible. It can be another electro or cryo unit, but it can also be a generic support of another element as well. Many of the current teammate options for Sandrone will be the upcoming buffed characters also releasing in Sandrone's patch, which make them stellar conduct oriented to pair with Sandrone. I've already covered these buffs in a separate video, so check that out if you want more info. Sandrone's current best looking electro support is Yai by a considerable margin. Her buffs make her deal a lot of off-field stellar conduct damage, and with her C1, which you can pick for free from the selector, she also buffs the team's electro and stellar conduct damage, making her kind of like an Anefa for the team. If you don't have Yai, you can use the newly buffed C6 Beto or Fischl, but there will be a noticeable damage difference without Yai. For the cryo support, one of the best options is actually Escoffier. Even though Sandrone's teams aren't a pure hydro cryo freeze team, Escoffier still does give a little bit of cryo rest rate with her passive, and she does deal decent consistent off-field cryo damage. A good Escoffier alternative that looks similar in performance is C6 Chi-Chi, who is a solid healer, increases stellar conduct damage in her new buffed base kit, and further gives quill buffs to stellar conduct damage with her C6. Without C6, Chi-Chi is still good to use. Other than Chi-Chi, you can also use the newly buffed C6 Diona. Now for the final flex support slot, C6 Chi-Chi is the current best looking option because of all of her new buffs and healing. Without C6, she is still one of the best options, but a good alternative support to use is Nicole, where her team-wide attack buff gets a lot of value with the existence of sub DPSs like Yai and Escoffier. Aside from Chi-Chi and Nicole, you can use C6 Eon-san, Shilonen, or Sucrose, and they're all fine because they're all generic supports. And if all of those supports are unavailable, you can use the buff C6 Diona or C6 Beto, who both now give stellar conduct related buffs with their burst. Lastly, in patch Luna 8, if you want to play the buffed Sino and Wriothesley in stellar conduct teams, since they need to be able to trigger stellar conduct, you'll need to play Sandrone, either as a dual DPS comp or with Sandrone just not doing anything. However, with the likely release of a new stellar conduct related 5-star support, these kind of teams likely won't remain as the only option for stellar conduct Sino and Wriothesley. That's everything on Sandrone as of now. Even with the current team options she has, Sandrone currently looks like an incredibly powerful DPS, potentially even too powerful. With her initial version 1 beta kit, Sandrone's teams were just alright. Early calcs using KQM standard had her best teams deal around 100k DPS, which is a little low for a new DPS, but is fine when you consider the high likelihood of future characters buffing her. In version 2 of the beta, Sandrone got some nice buffs, which was warranted, but the buff she got gave her a significant personal damage increase, more than a lot of people expected. And on top of that, EI received some bug fixes that further increased her damage. So because of all of these buffs, Sandrone's best teams are outputting pretty high numbers. Based on early calcs using KQM standard, her best teams are now calcing at around 120 to 130k DPS, with the C1 Yai, Escoffier, and C6 Chi-Chi team potentially being able to push close to 140k DPS. At face value, Sandrone is looking like a top tier DPS compared to the other top carries. However, her damage output gets a bit concerning when thinking about the state of the game when you consider the potential future new characters releasing in Snezhnaya. Based on what we know so far, stellar reactions have a very similar design to the current lunar reactions. So if HOYOverse decides to follow the exact same pattern for the upcoming characters of Snezhnaya, then we will most likely get a new 5-star support that will be best in slot for stellar conduct teams, and the Cryo Archon will also buff all stellar related teams, just like how Columbina buffed all the lunar teams. So there is a possibility that Sandrone is going to get 2 more significant damage increases with 2 new characters if HOYOverse decides to release stellar characters like the lunar characters. And considering Sandrone looks really strong already as a version 2 of the beta, then her damage is going to easily surpass the current best DPSs, further pushing power creep in the game. Now while I personally think this is likely, we of course don't currently know what's going to happen when Snezhnaya releases, including what characters are going to be introduced, what their kits are, how strong they will actually be, etc. So there is no way to know how strong Sandrone will be in the future. In addition, we are still early in the beta. The current state of Sandrone could be exactly where the devs want her to be, or she's going to receive nerfs. But regardless of what may or may not happen, I do think Sandrone will be meta relevant because she revolves around stellar conduct. And as we know from the lunar reactions, there will be enemies that shill stellar reactions, making Sandrone useful regardless of how much damage she will eventually deal. I hope this initial overview and analysis on Sandrone's beta kit was helpful to you all. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, or sub to the channel if you enjoyed. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.